What's going on, everybody? Thomas with Alpha Concepts here. Thanks for watching again. I'm joined with Chad, the Trigger Gerk. He is going to talk to us about Dryfire today, and that's going to be the topic of today's video. We're going to discuss all about Dryfire.
Dryfire is essentially a tool that you use off the range with no live ammo that allows you to continue to practice your fundamentals while at the comforts of your own home and still progressing through your shooting performance.
Why, now obviously Dryfire is very important. I agree with that 100%. Why do we want to Dryfire? Why are people out there, gun owners, why do they want to do the Dryfire?
So Dryfire, again, allows you the ability to enhance your performance without the cost of ammunition or the cost of going to a range. In fact, I would say that Dryfire is ultimately more important than the live fire aspects. Even as me as a concealed carrier and a manager at North Shore Sports Club, I will tell people in my concealed carry class that you need to do 70% dry fire and 30% live fire because you're creating more muscle memory by repetitions that is ultimately going to help you while you're off the range in a defensive situation. So now you have the ability to actually act and react instead of thinking and processing, what do I need to do?
And what I found just personally in my experience for Dryfire has made me a better shooter, really allows me to focus on the fundamentals. For new shooters, I recommend Dryfire all the time because you don't have that recoil, and the recoil can sometimes distract someone who's not used to it.
100%.
And you're less likely to develop bad habits, and then we all develop bad habits no matter what our shooting experience is, and so Dryfire allows us to erase those bad habits and get back to the fundamentals.
100%, just like Thomas said.
Chad, generally when you're doing your Dryfire, where are you taking care of that?
So when I do my Dryfire, I have two places that I like to do. One's going to be the closet. It allows me to just have a little confined space where I have a pasty on the wall, and I can practice those methods of Dryfiring that I do there. And maybe if I have a little more time, I'll go down to my basement, I'll throw on a movie, and I'll just sit there and Dryfire while having that movie as a background noise. That way I can get a little more mobile or a little less static. I can move around and do multiple target engagements, stuff like that.
I think that's really important to be able to be mobile, be on the move. Those are things we do in our defensive pistol class, and I know you have a similar class as well. It's not stuff that you can do on the range, and be honest, for some people to take a day and go do an advanced training class, it's sometimes hard to do.
Absolutely.
But you can do everything and all those techniques at home. Now, I want to say one thing. Some people will say practice makes perfect, and that's not correct. Perfect practice makes perfect. So you can build training scars if you're doing your Dryfire incorrectly, and we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that our Dryfire is correct form. And you mentioned 70-30. You said that generally you're going to get 70% of your repetitions are going to be Dryfire versus 30% live fire. Talk more about that.
So 70-30 is my ratio, and the reason that's my ratio is honestly I feel Dryfire is significantly more important than the actual live fire aspects. And the reason I say that is during live fire you have that recoil, and that recoil does a lot of weird things to the brain, especially as a newer shooter that's not somebody that's not used to it. So without that recoil, I can now focus on the front sight and the fundamentals and where my hands is and how I'm pressing the trigger. Am I coming at it with too much force or unevenly? Those things are matter, and I'm going to be able to diagnose those things quicker under Dryfire than I will under live fire.
When you're doing your own Dryfire, how are you grading yourself? What are you looking for?
So it depends on what the actual type of Dryfire I'm doing, but let's say I'm just doing a simple draw from the holster to presentation and then a trigger pull. Simply, I'm just looking for economy of motion from my holster to my present point. And then when I pull that trigger, I'm ensuring that my sights don't move during that Dryfire sequence. If I go to pull that trigger too hard and it yanks my sight low left, obviously there's something fundamentally wrong with my grip or my trigger pull, and I want to figure out what that is, and this is the perfect opportunity to do that.
So obviously when you said, I agree, when we're Dryfiring we want to have no ammunition present. The joke I have is if I ever go to someone's house and they have a random poster in their garage, look behind the poster, there might be a bullet hole. Talk to me more about, the safety things, how we ensure that we're not having a negligent discharge, especially like in our own house or something like that.
So that's a phenomenal question, Thomas, and thank you for asking it. But with the safety aspects, you can never be too careful. And I see this more with actual experts in firearms or people that have been doing firearms for a long time as they get a little complacent. When we're dry firing, we want to make sure there's no ammo present whatsoever. When I got into this classroom, the first thing Thomas did before we start the video is have me put my live fire rounds in a closet that's closed. There's no ammo present anywhere. That way, if something happens, maybe I take a phone call, and during that phone call, I actually decide I'm done in the middle of that phone call and put a magazine and put it in my holster. And then all of a sudden the phone call ends and I'm like, okay, let's do one more rep. And then that one more rep was with a fully loaded mag. You know, if different situations, I want to make sure that I'm as safe as possible during this process of dry firing.
And that sort of thing has happened with people cleaning their firearms as well. It's not just dry fire. You know, if you get distracted in what you're doing subconsciously, like Chad said, you might just insert that magazine not thinking, and next thing you know, you've got a loaded gun. So yeah, not only did we take our ammunition and put it in the closet, but actually I locked up the closet. There's 0% chance that we can have a negligent discharge if there's no ammunition present. So it's really, really important when you're doing your dry fire that you have no ammunition anywhere in the room, not just check, double check, verify, feel physically that the chamber is empty. If you're doing it in your basement, put the ammunition in your bedroom or in a random closet somewhere, but you make sure it's a 100% sterile environment.
And I checked multiple times throughout my dry fire, and I probably don't need to, but my brain keeps telling me, hey, double check, triple check, quadruple check, because you can never be too careful and you can never check enough.
So we've got the ammo cleared, we've got the ammo put away, we're working in a sterile environment. Talk about some of the ways that you dry fire.
So there's a lot of benefits to dry firing because you can do multiple different things. As I mentioned earlier, you can practice your magazine reloads, you can practice your actual fundamentals, I mean, all the way down to the stance, but you can also practice your sub-second draws and use a timer with that as well. And the way you're going to do that is with this particular timer, I can set where it goes to a random delay. I usually do about 3 to 4 seconds. That way it leaves me guessing when it's going to go off. And then for 1 second later, it'll do another beep. So you'll have a beep, 1 second later, you'll have another beep. By simply doing that, it allows me to know what time or how long it takes me to get this pistol from my holster to a presentation point and pull that trigger. And that is ultimately how I successfully learned how to get a sub-second draw.
And if you don't want to go out and buy a shot timer, which of course you can do, I have a similar shot timer, mine's basically the same idea. You can download shot timer apps for your phone and accomplish exactly the same thing. Now, when it comes to live fire, I don't like the shot timer apps. They're not quite as sensitive as a standalone shot timer, but for dry fire at home, they absolutely get the job done. So that's something that you might consider, like Chad said, for getting those sub-second draws. And we want to get faster progressively. We don't want to force the speed. The speed will come naturally through repetition. But when you're sitting there and you want to time yourself, that's definitely the way to go.
The reason I wanted to talk about the sub-second draw is this is one of the things that I found that's helped me significantly, because the fact that you're going faster than you normally do with a gun and bullets doesn't sound healthy to me. You know, I want to be super safe while I'm at the range, and trying to really push myself for that sub-second speed wasn't, in my opinion, the smartest thing to do under live fire, especially for the first couple of times. So being able to do a dry fire with a shot timer was huge for me and allowed me to actually develop a sub-second draw fairly quickly.
And I've had mistakes myself when I'm drawing. It happens. You know, sometimes I think I'm cleared the garment completely, and next thing I know, I got a handful of shirt with the pistol. So I'd rather have those mistakes happen dry fire when I'm trying to push that envelope, when I'm trying to push that speed, than live fire. Obviously, grabbing a handful of shirt on the draw is not the end of the world, but it's not ideal either. We want to push ourselves beyond our breaking point to find our breaking point, then rein it back in just a little bit, and then strategically push past that breaking point. And dry fire is the safest way to do that.
Completely agree.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So you talk about ways to dry fire and using a shot timer being one of those ways for being able to push that sub-second draw. And you've got a little cheat sheet here with a few other methods. So why don't you kind of go through the list of some of the other ways that you can dry fire?
Will do. So we already talked about with a timer, but another one that I do a lot is just simply from the holster to presentation, because defensive shooting is one of my things I kind of focus on because it's what I do now. I'm no longer military, so I do a lot less LARPing with AR-15s and night vision and stuff, and focus more on the defensive from the appendix. But other things you can do is reloads. Get a couple of magazines that are empty. You don't need dummy ammo, but it does help to have a couple of rounds to be able to send that slide forward depending on how you actually actuate that slide. Multiple target dry fires. When you're shooting multiple targets, you want your eyes to move first, your head to move first, then the gun to move first. So this is something you can practice without any rounds, just with a gun on a couple of targets next to the wall. Dry fire with a weapon mounted light, just practicing coming out of that holster and activating that light and getting proficient with it. The more repetitions you do with this, the actually better you're going to get. Some other things you can do is snap caps and dry rounds, which I just talked about. Dry fire actual live drills. There's a lot of drills out there, guys. You got Matt Little's got a couple of drills. You got the 10-10-10 drill. You got the Bill drill. You can practice all these drills at home. So why I like to do these drills is there's a lot of things that you can do as far as one hand strong, one hand weak hand, and you can try, weird positions. You can drop to the ground real quick and practice dry firing those weird positions that we might find ourselves in at particular times. That's an excellent time to do that because you're dry, you're safe, and you don't have to worry about shooting the wrong thing or shooting yourself if you're laying down on the ground.
Yeah, and we did a video about tactical reloads, and I was talking about how dry fire, with your tactical reload, you don't need any ammunition. You can be sitting there watching TV on the couch, just doing your tactical reloads. So definitely that's a way. Doing your reloads with some dummy rounds, drop from slide lock, drop it, insert rack, or send the slide forward, however you practice, getting all those repetitions. And the other thing I'll mention about a weapon mounted light is I am a fan of weapon mounted lights, but we see from a lot of people the fact that they want to use their firearm like a flashlight, and it's not a flashlight, it's a firearm with a flashlight. And you don't want to be pointing that flashlight at things that you don't want to destroy because you're pointing your muzzle at things you don't want to destroy. And I actually will do dry fire with the flashlight actually in my house, practicing techniques that I can bounce the light angles off of things and not directly at what I might not want to shoot, using my ceiling or my floor for indirect lighting. So all of that's really, really important to figure out how to use, again, a weapon mounted light properly without causing potential safety or harm to somebody else.
Absolutely, that's great. I mean, think about kids that might be entering the house late at night. You don't realize they're gone or they're coming in. You go downstairs to look and see what it is with your firearm, swinging that light all over the place like you shouldn't be doing. But ultimately what's going to happen is you're probably going to end up pointing a fully loaded firearm at your loved one as they come in through the door.
Yeah,
and that's not what we want to do.
Not acceptable at all. So we talk about different ways that you can dry fire, different methods, different practice routines, things like that. How do you kind of sort of schedule to make sure you're not getting stale or spending too much time on one thing?
So we all do this as doing a lot of dry fire. You always want to kind of cater to what you're good at. But that's, not really the purpose of dry fire. We want to get better at the things we're not good at. So the mindset is, I'm really good at magazine reloads, so I'm going to do 100 more so I can get even better. If you're really that good at magazine reloads, maybe it's time to focus on another aspect of the dry fire, which could simply be the fact that maybe you have a little too much finger on the trigger when you're pulling the trigger, and that's sending your round to a different area, or that slingshot in your front sight to a different area where you don't want it. So what you need to do is change things up. Put your hand a little bit forward on the slide. Maybe take it back a little bit more and back a little bit more. See how those affect you in dry fire. Because ultimately what we want is when we pull that gun up to engage that wall with that sticker on there, we want to make sure our front sight is not going anywhere. So if it is, change things up. See what works for you. The idea of having a firearm is high up on, having your hands as high up on that firearm and as far forward on that firearm as possible is great. But there's a right and a wrong way to do it, but there's a right and a right way towards you to perfect it. A lot of people shoot thumbs forward, thumbs up. It's personal preference. Both are correct, but one might be better for you, and that's the time to figure it out.
Absolutely. And dry fire, you can really figure out what works for you. And when Chad was talking about like holster draw, some people appendix carry, some people strong side, some people small of the back. Well, how do you know what's right for you? Try it under dry fire, figure it out under dry fire, get those repetitions, figure out what you like. That's going to make a huge difference. So, you talked about holster draw, you talked about doing grip. I mean, there's a lot of other things. Do you kind of sort of set a schedule when you're doing your dry fire, or how do you figure out like today I'm going to work on this?
So how I figure out what I'm going to work on is what I failed to do at the range. If I didn't do so good on something, particularly on the range, then that's when I'm going to go home and I'm going to dry fire the crap out of that. That way I can get good. One of my arch nemesis is the ability to actually draw and then cross over my gun to my left hand. I'm not a very good transition from the draw to the left hand, and I'm not very accurate. And if anybody knows Matt Little, his specific drill, you shoot quite a bit on the right hand and quite a bit on the left hand. When I took his class and I tried his stuff, I was not very good at it, and that was a deficiency on me. And that's when I realized, Thomas, hey, I need to go home and dry fire and practice more with my right hand unsupported and my left hand unsupported, because I really am not as good as I thought I was with that.
Yeah, and like I was telling you, we have our defensive pistol level 3 class, which is all one-handed. And I'll tell you right now, that's my weakness as well. When I completed my NRA law enforcement instructor training class, we were actually doing a lot of left-handed shooting as well. I do practice left-handed from time to time, but not as much as I should, because just like you said, we tend to want to practice the things we're good at. It's that self-gratification, you know, slap ourselves on the back and say, oh, look how great I am. But we should practice what we suck at, not what we're good at. Yes, we should practice what we're good at, but we should spend the bulk of our time practicing what we're not good at. And that's the only way that you're going to get better.
Yeah, you don't want 2 categories at the very top and everything, you know, at the 10% level. You want a solid 50% or higher on everything if possible, and then move everything up, continuing moving everything up from there. But you don't, if you have something that you're really not good at and you know you're not good at, hold yourself accountable and start working on that.
Absolutely. Talk to me about, you know, we talked about a shot timer, but talk to me about a few other tools that you use when you're doing your dry fire.
So for me, I try to use as minimal tools as possible. For me, a shot timer is a necessity. No hands, ifs, or buts. The shot timer doesn't lie, and it tells you what your true times are. And it allows you to use that in dry fire and live fire as well. One tool that I do use is the Mantis Blackbeard for my AR-15, because it does reset the trigger, and it does make it a little more fun. Can I get the same effect without of it? Absolutely. But again, it helps reset the trigger and helps speed up the ability of me doing what I'm doing with that AR-15 as well. You have the Mantis system itself. I'm not a huge fan of it. I probably would be a little more of a fan of it if I actually understood what those statistical numbers were. Honestly, I'm not that smart. I don't understand what's going on with it. I've played with it a lot. There are a couple of things that I use with it, but honestly, a lot of it's just gibberish that doesn't seem to really help me in any way, shape, or form. Like, it'll see patterns and stuff like that, but you can spend $100 to $250 on these things like that, or you can just simply draw your pistol and just work on a dead trigger. In fact, that's mostly what I do, and that's what's helped me the most, more than trying to figure out how this system works and how it can benefit me.
So you mentioned a shot timer is an absolute must for you. If I had to pick one thing in my dry fire routine that I would say is an absolute must, it's right there, the camera. Because as an instructor, standing back watching a student allows me really to get the full picture. As I'm judging myself, I can't see what I'm doing, so I'll actually set up a camera, and you don't need a dedicated video camera. All of us have video cameras on our phones. You know, stand it up in the side where you can get a nice picture yourself. Press record, start doing your routine, do some repetitions, stop, look at the camera, judge yourself. What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? What can I maybe try a little different? Let's try it this way. Press record, repeat, judge yourself, find out what your inefficiencies are, find out where you're kind of fumbling a little bit, because you get that stand back, you get that full picture of what you're doing, and that's really the best way that I found for kind of grading myself, like I said, as an instructor, treating myself as also the student.
Like Thomas said, videotaping yourself is great, because you're just sitting there just studying your videos. I shot competitively long range for 5 years, and guess what you do in long range? You take your notes and you study your notes. You learn wind, you learn Coriolis, you're going through all these different things as far as dope in your head, because it consistently changes due to environments, and you're trying to find a pattern that works for you. But also, like he was saying, as far as videotaping, tape yourself during live fire with the gun in your hand during recoil. See what it's doing. I think a lot of you guys would be surprised. Do a slow-mo video of it and actually legitimately look at that slow-mo video and what angles and directions that gun is rotating in while you're shooting that live fire.
I agree with that 100%. My wife, we were at the range one time. I like to take my family shooting, and she got a slow-mo video of me with her, just an iPhone. And it was like, wow, it was really kind of amazing, like you said. And actually to see the recoil management that varied from one pistol to the next, because I've got an M&P competition pistol and I was having 0 muzzle rise, but then with my 320 carry pistol, obviously the muzzle rise is different, and there's a number of reasons for that: a shorter barrel, a lower tang. So all of those things, to be able to see what happens under recoil on slow motion makes a difference. And I'll tell you what else is, if you've ever come out to one of our defensive pistol classes, you know we have cameras set up. And the thing is, we don't always use those cameras for promotional. Yeah, sometimes we do, but the bottom line is I review after the class, and I'm actually judging myself as an instructor, but I'm also looking for things that I didn't see during the class. You know, I've seen students kind of rock back on their heels, and you know, the whole time I didn't see it as I'm standing 10 feet away from them. And so that just tells me that I need to be more perceptive to look at these things. So it's not just helping me be a better shooter, it's helping me be a better instructor as well. And you know, like I said, taking that step back, that big picture, you can get a lot more information.
Keynote, videotape both sides, front and back. You might learn some different things by, you know, if you're always videotaping from the left, you never videotape from the right, you're not going to really see what you're doing from the right side. You get different angles by videotaping all around you, but, you know, videotape. It's going to be a great way to educate yourself later on down the road when you got some time, again, to go through that video and say, oh, I did this error. That's something I need to work on.
And if you do a really good job, send it to your friends and brag.
Absolutely. You know, bragging rights and also critiquing. I tell my students for Trigger Gerk, send me all your dry fire videos and live fire videos, and I diagnose and tell you whatever I can. I do that for free. So get out there and record.
I'm going to put his email address on the screen and just start sending him videos.
Please do.
All right, so we talked about ways and where and safety and all of that. So what are you, goals? What are you trying to achieve?
So goals, you know, everybody's going to have a different goal as far as dry fire and all this other stuff. But whatever goal you set, you want to make sure that it's a realistic goal. If I've just gotten into shooting for the last, 4 months ago, and I've been to the range 4 times, my goal is not going to be a sub-second draw. My goal at that point is just getting fundamentals down and memorizing fundamentals, getting to the point where it becomes a second nature. I always tell students, if you can't pick up a gun and get a perfect grip instantly, you're not ready to move and shoot, you're not ready to go, do those tactical things that everybody wants to do because it looks fun. You have to get those basics down to muscle memory in order before you get to the point where you're actually going doing the really fun stuff.
And I tell all my students, you have to crawl before you walk and walk before you run, and it's exactly what you're saying. You've got to have a progression. We have the little man challenge with the target 2 inches by 3 inches and repeating the Illinois concealed carry license test, which is done on a 2 foot by 3 foot target. Mm-hmm. So obviously we're really shrinking that down to make it very difficult. And I tell all my students this is, don't be hard on yourself if you're not going to get it done on the first try. I didn't get it done on the first try. In fact, personal best right now is 28 out of 30, and I'm trying to achieve 30 out of 30. The point is to progress, to take the next step, to take baby steps, to get a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit smoother each time.
Now, 100% correct, but one term I actually hate is the slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I understand what it means and where it comes from, but the reason I don't like it is slow. Yes, if you're a very beginner, new shooter, go slow. Get your fundamentals down, go at a very slow pace that you need to in order to get what you need to do. But when you start wanting to go fast, guess what? You have to go fast in order to be fast. So if you're looking to get that sub-second draw and you've got everything else down, now it's time to pick up that shot timer, start dry firing a lot, and get to the point where you can get to that sub-second draw. Again, dry fire is the key to a lot of your guys' problems.
What other benefits are you seeing when you're doing your dry fire?
So when you do dry fire, remember you're treating it just like live fire. So when you're drawing, you want to make sure you're drawing with the same grip, the same strength, the same everything that you would if that was a live round in the barrel about to go out. So you want to make sure you're, again, doing everything exactly like live fire. When you do that, if you're dry firing several thousand times, guess what? Your muscles are going to get tired and you're going to be working your muscles, and in time gives you more strength. Strength is a necessity for shooting. I'm not saying you got to be the Incredible Hulk, but by building these forearm muscles does help grip the pistol. That way you're gripping it tighter with less effort, which allows you to do without shaking.
I think that's an amazing point about actually using the same amount of strength that you would use. I think grip strength is something that is underrated. Obviously, having grip strength allows us to manage recoil. Managing recoil comes from the grip as well as the stance. And that is something from a defensive point of view, being able to put defensively accurate target hits on target as quickly as possible is really the goal. You know, marksmanship, I have the luxury of time. Defensive shooting, I don't. And so, yeah, if we are not practicing a proper tight grip in our dry fire, then what's going to come out in a high stress situation? The cliche that you will fight how you have trained it's real. It's going to kick in. You're going to do what you've programmed your brain to do. And if you programmed your brain to have a limp, weak wrist, then that might be what you get.
Yeah, 100%. So treat dry fire like it's live fire minus the rounds and you being at the range.
Chad, you mentioned that you had a challenge, not a shooting challenge, a dry fire challenge. Explain more about that, because you discussed a little bit, but go into more detail for me.
So Chad's dry fire challenge is for anybody to try, but overall is just kind of keep it basic and simple and not take a lot of time, because people that are getting something into, or they're just getting into this, probably don't want to spend an hour doing it, at least not at first. So my dry fire challenge is 5 minutes a day. Take 5 minutes out of your day. If you do that, you can do about 65 reps that day. If you do it for 7 days, that's 455 reps you've gotten in through the week. That's your starting ground. That's to kind of get you into the dry fire aspects of things and get you in a dry fire mindset. Feel free to go hours. If you, like I said, I'll go down to the basement, I'll put on a movie for background noise, and I'll just sit there and I'll dry fire and I'll dry fire. I might dry fire for 20 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then go back at it for another 20 minutes. I'm not going to sit there for an entire hour and a half consistently do it, because remember, if you're coming at it with, like you are on a live fire range, your arms are going to get sore. Your forearms and the top of your arms are going to get sore because you're coming at it thousands of times with the same amount of strength as you would if you're live firing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that have a plan is kind of what you're saying. Yeah, I think having a plan makes sense, to something to work towards specifically, and having a challenge is always a great way of having a plan. That's good information. Chad, I think you gave us some real great information about dry fire, why it's important, when, where, how, the safety aspects. Kind of like summarize it for us, give us some closing remarks about it, put it all together in one nice, neat little package for the viewers, and then let's get out of here and get a beer.
Sounds good. So, guys, remember the safety aspects of dry fire. Keep the ammo away. Always know, even if you're dry firing, you're empty, make sure you're pointing in an area where if it does go off, that it's going to be still in a safe area, first of all. Second of all, remember, treat it as if you were a live fire. If you are limp wristing and have weak grip, you're going to have that in an actual engagement, because guess what? You're doing more dry fire. You should be doing more dry fire than live fire. So then that live fire is that dry fire is going to start hurting you if you're not treating it as if you were at the range. But ultimately, remember, you have to dry fire to get better. You're going to see significant progress by doing it. Please check out try that challenge. And if it didn't work for you, let me know. If there's something I need to add, change, or whatever, let me know. But ultimately, get out there, dry fire, true it up with live fire, and be safe. That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
All right. As always, everybody, be armed, be trained, and be alpha. And part of training is dry fire.
Dry fire.
If I ever do a bloopers, I think you're going to make the cut.